All right, we should probably get it going here. Anybody who joins can obviously jump in as we go. Thank you for attending. My name is John Krams. I'm the National Sales Manager for Prism Lighting. Prism is a division of American Lighting focused primarily on the architectural specification market. We have some different products than American Lighting, but we do kind of share the realm of DMX on some of the products. And so today's training is not really designed to give you expertise in programming DMX software, things like that. It's just designed to give you an overall knowledge base of what DMX is, what it can do, what the parts and pieces look like, putting systems together from simple systems to complicated systems. As we go through this, all of you guys are muted, so certainly you can type comments and questions as we go. I prefer to save them all till the end if possible. I also have our in-house DMX controls expert who will join towards the end for the question and answer session that we go through, who can do more technical expertise and things like that. But again, save questions hopefully till the end. We'll go through it, and if we're all ready, we'll get started with hopefully no technical glitches. So what we'll go through today, we will see what DMX can do. We'll talk about what is DMX, how it works, how it's controlled, the limitations, and then we'll answer questions. We will not be talking about DMX the rapper, although we could probably set up a separate training session just on that if we want to at a later date, but we will not be talking about him today. What can DMX do? You've seen DMX. You may not have known it was DMX, but you've seen DMX. If you've gone to a concert and you've appreciated the light show, you've seen DMX. If you've gone down to your downtown areas and you've seen buildings that are lit up with color changing facades, bridges, things like that, you've seen DMX. You might not have understood that that's what's actually making those lights do what they're doing, but that is all being controlled via DMX. DMX could be just playing a show that lights a building up purple, like in the bottom thing there, or it could be doing things in real time, like the example in the concert there. It doesn't just control lights, right? So DMX in this picture is not only controlling the lights, but it's also controlling the movement of those fountains. And we'll talk more about how DMX can control motion as well as lights. It does a lot of things when it comes to fountain pumps, the movement of the pumps, the actual regulation of the water possibly, raising and lowering motors, things like that. So when you're looking at, again, this concert photo, those lights are being controlled by the color, but also the movement of those lights is being controlled by DMX as well. But primarily what we see is more stuff like this, right? We see bars, restaurants, smaller applications. That's kind of the day-to-day stuff that we see being controlled by DMX. So in this photo, for example, the shelves are being controlled with color changing tape light underneath the bar, color changing tape light. All of that is being controlled via DMX. So, it does not have to be on a grand scale. It can be a small application like this. It could be a single run of lights in somebody's basement bar or something like that. It could still be DMX. You'll notice there's a little thing on my screen there that says decline. I don't know what that is. I can't seem to get it to disappear. So just ignore that. That has nothing to do with the presentation. It's just something that's stuck on my monitor and I can't get it out. So what is DMX? It's primarily used in the theater world, whether it's a stage production, a play, concerts, things like that. And it does control the lights. It controls the moving lights. It controls the color of the lights, and it can control things like fog machines, things like that. So it is primarily used in the theater world, or I guess you should say that's where it came from. It originated in the world of theater. DMX stands for Digital Multiplex 512, and it's basically means, the 512 means that we're controlling 512 channels over a DMX cable. We'll talk more about all this stuff as we go through it, so don't get confused yet. DMX signal is a set of 512 individual intensity levels or channels that can be constantly updated. So when we're changing colors, we have dynamic scenes, those intensity levels are being raised and lowers to get to different colors and things like that. A channel has 255 steps that are assigned to control attributes in each light. So what that means is a single channel has 255 steps. So think of it as 0 to 100%, but it's actually 0 to 255. So as you're raising and lowering those steps, you're controlling the amount of light, let's say. So we'll talk more about it. Don't get confused yet. It might be a color like red or green. It could also be a step of motion. So you could control the motion in 255 steps. So from 0 to 360 degree might be done in 255 steps. It could be in a circle, it could be up and down. So motion is also controlled by those same steps. So that's why when we talk about DMX, or I should say color changing, we can say that we have up to 16 million color combinations. That's because the red, the green, and the blue channel each have 255 steps. When you multiply those, you get that 16 million. Within DMX, we talk about universes a lot, and there are 512 DMX channels that make up one DMX universe. We'll talk more about all this stuff as we go through, so don't get confused. An address is another name for a channel, right? So to control individual fixtures, you have to have a DMX address. Addresses can be shared between fixtures, so you might have 3 fixtures that share the same DMX address. That's a possibility. And we'll talk about why you might want to do that as we go through the presentation. But generally speaking, each individual fixture will have its own set of DMX addresses. The data is sent through a DMX cable through pulses of electricity from your lighting control system. We'll talk about the various different types of lighting controllers as we go through this as well. And it is not manufacturer specific, right? So brand A can control brand B's lights as long as it's DMX to DMX. So when you're looking at a project that may have existing DMX on site, that's okay if you're using lights that are not made by that same controller. It is a generic protocol amongst all manufacturers. So it could be a console controller, it could be a lighting control system that's dedicated to DMX, it could be lots of different things, but it is DMX is DMX is DMX. It doesn't matter who's talking to who, it's talking DMX, we're all good. There are lots of different manufacturers out there, some that you may have heard of: Pharos, Nicolati, ETC, Chromatech, Prism has controllers, Color Kinetics, Crestron, lots and lots of different providers of DMX controls, and they all will talk to any DMX device, which is very nice when we're doing projects that may have existing controls on hand, or you're mixing and matching because one controller does something that you wanted to do, but you're not using that brand's lights. It makes it very nice and user-friendly that anybody can talk to anybody, so to speak. Again, we talked about this. It can control movement as well. So when we're talking about moving lights, fountain pumps, raise and lower motors, fog machines, things in our world we probably don't see a whole lot of, but you may come across it. You never know. It's a possibility that you may be asked to control that. I was asked to control some fountain pumps with a DMX controller once on a project that had underwater DMX controlled lights, but they wanted my control system to control the pumps that were operated via DMX. So we could control how much water was being sent out of those pumps at any given time based on those 255 steps that we allowed on a channel of DMX to that pump. So channels and addresses, right? Channels are addresses and addresses are channels. When we talk about fixtures in the color changing world, we generally say RGB or RGBW. RGB stands for red, green, and blue. Each one of those colors is a DMX channel. So that we refer to as a 3-channel fixture. If we have RGBW or maybe an RGB amber fixture, that would be considered a 4-channel fixture, and it would consume 4 DMX addresses. There are some fixtures out there that may use 7 channels. So you might have red, green, blue, 4000K white, a 27K white, a royal blue, a lime. You might have up to 7, 8 different channels or colors in one fixture that need to all be addressed and controlled individually to get to a specific color that you're looking to do. So you see more of those 7-channel things in more of the theatrical world. Typically in the architectural world that what we live in, we'll either see RGB or we'll see RGBW. And we'll talk a little bit about more where you use what in a few slides coming up. So the first fixture in my installation in an RGB would typically start at address number 1, and it would consume 1, 2, and 3. So red would be 1, green would be 2, and blue would be 3. The next fixture, if we're going sequentially, would start at 4. If we were doing RGBW fixtures, it might be a little bit differently. We would start at 1, have 2, 3, and 4, and the next fixture possibly would start at 5 if we're going sequentially. I talked about how fixtures can share addresses, and that's true. If we want, because we want to conserve DMX addresses, or because we want some fixtures to do the same thing as each other that might be next to each other, and we just need more light output or something, and they are designed to do the same thing, they can share DMX addresses. So 2 fixtures can be a starting address of 1, and that's perfectly fine, and we see that a lot to save DMX addresses potentially. 3-channel installation, so in RGB, we can have up to 170 fixtures on one DMX universe. A universe is 512 channels, so if you multiply 3 times 170, it gets you to pretty close to 512. So that will consume a full DMX universe. With RGBW, we're adding an additional channel to every fixture, so that reduces the number of fixtures we can put on a DMX universe, and it takes it down to 128 fixtures per universe. DMX addresses can be shared, like I said, depending on the application. You might want to share addresses. And some fixtures may have multiple controlled sections. So you might have multiple addresses in one fixture. For example, a 4-foot linear fixture might be controlled every 12 inches. So every 12 inches in an RGBW fixture will have 4 DMX addresses. So that 4-foot fixture will consume a total of 16 DMX addresses. So you want to be careful when you're doing your address count, that you're taking into consideration how many possible addresses a fixture might have. You might not need all of that resolution, and you can change that depending on the fixture. You can change it from 1-foot resolution, so being able to control 1 foot to control it every 4 foot. A typical RGB flood, though, will be 1, 2, 3, or 4 addresses. If we're talking about an RGBW fixture, a typical flood type fixture will have just 4 addresses. So typical addressing, if we're doing a building on the exterior and we want each one of those fixtures to be controlled independently to do a different color, the first fixture would start at 1 and it would consume 1, 2, 3, 4. The next one would start at 5 and it would consume 5, 6, 7, 8. And then the third one, 9, 10, 11, 12. So in this application, address 1, 5, and 9 will all control red. 2, 5, 6, and 10 will all control green. 3, 7, 11, blue, and then 4, 8, and 12 would control the white channels. Linear fixtures, though, may not be so typical when you address them. Like I mentioned before, that 4-foot RGBW fixture potentially can be controlled every 4 inch or 12 inches, which would result in 16 DMX addresses on an RGB application. Or we can change that through some programming typically and make it a single 4-foot resolution, which would only use 4 DMX addresses. You may need to have 12-inch resolution. You can see the picture on the right there. You can see how it's got those vertical bands of light. That fixture is being controlled every 12 inches because they wanted very dynamic, sweeping kind of wave effects going down that wall, versus the one on the bottom there where they just want something more uniform and they don't necessarily need that level of control. We can change that resolution so that we're doing 4 DMX addresses in one fixture, conserving DMX addresses, which potentially will result in a smaller, less expensive control system, right? The more points of light we're controlling, the more DMX addresses we have, potentially the larger and more expensive our control system will become. All right, so we said RGB, we said RGBW, we said RGBA. I think someone had a question. Yes, we will get you a copy of that. Sorry, I'm going to hold all the questions to the end though. Just wanted to make sure somebody wasn't saying that they couldn't hear me or something like that. So RGB, RGBW, RGBA, what are they? When do we use them? RGB is kind of what we started with, right? So everything, when we talk about color changing, we generally, as just a generic term, we say RGB, red, green, blue, and it's pretty commonly accepted for color changing fixtures. It's great for color changing applications. It'll do pretty much everything we want it to do for the most part. Generally speaking, you'll have a lower cost when compared with RGBW and RGBA. The fixture itself potentially is going to be less expensive. And again, we're not adding as many DMX channels, so my control system may be a little bit less expensive. You can make white light with RGB. It is not a very good light, white light. It tends to look pinkish or bluish depending on the chipset and the fixture. But when you put red, green, and blue on, you will get white. If you look at this diagram here, this is what we call the color gamut. And when we use RGB fixtures, we can hit any of these color points within this gamut. It's like, that's what we talked about, that 16 million color combinations. You'll also notice this black line here in the middle. It's a little hard to see, but that's called the black body curve. And that's actually where all the white points sit. So you can start down at 1900 or whatever that says and go all the way to 10,000 CCT. You can do white points with RGB because within the gamut, you have your white points. With RGBW though, you get a better quality white light because we add a fourth chip that is white. It could be a 3000K chip, it could be a 4000K chip. Different manufacturers will have different specifications on what that white is. Some manufacturers will allow you to specify what you want that white chip to be. You might want it to be a 27K, you might want it to be a 6000K. Really depends on the application. That generally is specifiable though. And it's becoming more of the standard within color changing applications. Right, like I say at the bottom there, anything you can do, I can do better. So anything the RGB fixture can do, the RGBW can do, but it's going to give you better white points. So it's really good where white light is very important in an application. Let's say you have a historical courthouse or a historical library in your downtown area, and they want to swap out the existing metal halide or high pressure sodium, whatever they're used to a color changing fixture. But they want to maintain the theme and look of that historic building where they use white light 90% of the time. But then on special occasions, whether the local sports team is playing or there is a holiday, Christmas, 4th of July, Pink for breast cancer awareness, things like that, they want to do some color changing. You can still do that. With your RGBW fixture, you get your color changing capabilities, but you get your better quality white light where you need that most of the time. You get good pastels with that as well. Typically you get higher lumens as well because you're adding an additional chip, so you get a little bit more light output potentially. And then RGB amber. RGB amber is really nice when color is the most important thing on your project. If you don't need white so much, but you want the most available amount of colors, you would do RGB amber. It's not as discussed and talked about as RGB or RGBW, but be aware that it's out there. And if we look at the gamut again, this is the normal gamut with RGB and RGBW where that dotted line is. But when I add the amber chip, I actually bump out the gamut and I get the ability to cover more colors. Where that's important is where I have things like oranges or I'm trying to do fire effects. Right here in Denver, we have the Denver Broncos and people want to light their building up in orange and blue when the Broncos are playing. It's not as easy to hit orange with an RGB or RGBW fixture as it is with an RGB amber. You can see how that gamut where it bumps out down there in the corner, it's in those oranges, right? So if you're really specific on what colors you need or you just want the most amount of colors, RGB amber is a great way to go. Specifically if you're working with somebody, a corporate account or a sports team that has that need for orange or gold or fire effect type colors in their lighting schemes. You can still make white light with it because you still have the ability with that RGB to make your white light. You're just going to try to probably get a little bit more kind of in the tungsten range, a little bit warmer light, white lights generally speaking. All right, moving on here. My slides will advance. So how does a DMX system work? Well, there's three things that we definitely have to have, right? We definitely have to have a DMX controller or a DMX source. And we'll talk about some of the varieties of those in the next couple of slides. You need a way to transmit that DMX signal from the controller, and you need to go to a DMX compatible device, whether it's a light, whether it's a moving head, whether it's a fountain pump, whatever it is, you have to have those three components at minimum, right? And when we talk about transmitting the signal, we really generally like to have a hard connection with a DMX cable. There are specific DMX cables out there that are available. Companies like Belden makes a DMX cable. It can be quite costly. The better bet sometimes for budget-friendly jobs is to use shielded Cat5 or Cat6. It'll carry the DMX signal just fine. It's very cost-effective. You know, we're talking pennies per foot versus dollars per foot on a specific DMX cable. And you know, most contractors generally are going to have Cat5 or Cat6 on a truck, more so than they will have a specific DMX cable, right? The needs for DMX cables are very limited. That's something they would probably buy project per project, but generally speaking, they'll have DMX Cat5 available on their truck, especially in the warehouse, or it's easier for them to get, right? I don't know a lot of supply houses that are stocking DMX cable necessarily. That's more of a special order thing, right? So once we have our system, which is a controller, fixture, and obviously a way to transmit the signal, we have to configure the fixtures in the software so that the devices know what to do at any given time. Each one of those fixtures has to be addressed so that it knows what to do when based on the programming. So again, each fixture could have a unique DMX address, 1234, 5678, or they could share again, right? So they have to have an address. Once it's configured, the controller is capable of transmitting information to the devices that are connected, right? So that's good. And then there are different ways of setting those DMX addresses at the fixture level. Sometimes fixtures have a little onboard push buttons or displays, and you can actually just scroll with some push buttons to get to your DMX starting address. There may be dip switches. In the past, dip switches were very popular, not so popular anymore. Maybe proprietary software. So manufacturer A may require you to hook up a laptop and use their software and connect the software through the controller to their fixture to set the DMX address, or you use something called RDM, Remote Device Management. We'll show what that looks like. Oop, I thought I was going to show that. Maybe I missed that slide. RDM is basically allows two-way communication between a control system and the fixture itself. Generally, it's used for testing and addressing. Yeah, I have a slide later, I'm sorry, that shows the RDM stuff. But it's allowing stuff in the future where we can do things with RDM, where we can monitor run times, we can monitor temperatures of fixtures. So RDM is becoming more and more popular for remote monitoring of systems. But for the most part in our world, we use RDM to address the fixture. And it's a handheld device typically. I'll show you what it looks like in a few slides. Very simple and easy to use. Slides are not advancing. There we go. So a simple system is basically what I talked about, 3 components, right? You have this, let's say this is Bob's man cave, and he's just got a couple of things of tape light or neon, and he's just controlling a line of light around the bar. It's got a DMX source, very simple, easy to use controller. You've got, in this case, a DMX decoder that talks from the control system and will relay the information to the tape light or neon in this case. That line is generally going to be your DMX cable. So you've got DMX cable running from your controller into the decoder, and then from the decoder, you're running out to your fixture itself. You may not need the decoder. If this was a fixture, a floodlight fixture, you might go DMX straight to that fixture. But again, very simple, easy to use. Versus a complicated DMX system, when we're talking about maybe a large skyscraper in downtown, you might have multiple sources or multiple products on a particular job. You might have some interior fixtures that's got a color changing sculpture in the lobby. The exterior has some facade, maybe some DMX kind of media facade signage type stuff. You've got some landscape lighting, doing some trees maybe, or some small walls on the entrance to the building. Some accent pieces, and then you've got your, maybe it's a skyscraper at the very top, you've got some floods that are lighting the crown of the building. So that would be more of a complex system, right? So you're going to have a lot more components there, a lot more fixtures to control versus this side here where it's very simple, easy to use. User doesn't really care about, having different zones, different things being done at the same time. They just really have a couple of runs of tape light, very simple and easy to control. Where this, obviously requires a lot more planning, a lot more in the layout, a lot more components. Programming is going to be obviously involved in this, where somebody's going to have to write these shows and make sure that each one of those different fixture types is doing a different thing at any given time. So you can see how they can get quite complex. They get even more complex than this in some applications. RDM, remote device management, that again is for the bidirectional communication. So between the fixture and your controller, or potentially through just an RDM device. Generally, we see it used for testing and addressing, although like I said, we are seeing more applications where RDM can then communicate back to a control system, things like how long the fixture's been running, operating temperatures. So you can see if you have a fixture maybe that's running a little hot, that might cause an alert where you want to go check it out and see if it needs to be repaired or replaced. It also can do things like show you, with runtime, so you could anticipate end of life potentially. Lots of different things, lots of different ways for monitoring are being incorporated with RDM now, because it's allowing DMX, which traditionally is a single way communication. It's allowing for two-way communication, and for control systems that are getting more and more advanced and complex to be able to monitor the fixtures themselves and monitor the system. So things like, you may have a fixture that goes offline. You potentially can get an email alert as a building manager, engineer, or owner and say, oh, I got a fixture that's offline. Call the electrician, call the maintenance people and say, hey, fixture number 7 seems to be offline. Can you go check it out? It may be dead, it may be defective, it may got bombarded with hail. Maybe the window washer came by and disconnected a cable by accident, simply plug it back in. But the RDM is allowing for a lot of two-way communication and data management within the DMX systems, which is really nice for end users and owners to have. Lots of different options for DMX control systems. Some of these you may have seen, some of them maybe you haven't. We talked about, concerts. You'll see those big giant boards. One of those boards is controlling the sound mixing, and the other one is controlling the lights. Tablet or phone app-based controls, wall station controls, touchscreen controls, DIN rail or rack mounted controls, lots of different options as far as controls. Everybody makes their own control system. They're all kind of uniquely different in appearance, but they generally are going to be doing the same thing. Within those controls, there's different user interfaces to do the programming. They all look somewhat similar, but some might be a little bit different, right? Those are generally proprietary to each control system. So you can't just say, well, I'm used to using DMX master control software from brand A, and I have brand B's controller. I'm used to it. I'm familiar with my traditional software. I want to use it on the other guy's software controller. That doesn't work. They're all proprietary to the specific control manufacturer. Is it a good idea to learn a lot of them if you're going to do a lot of DMX and you're an integrator? Yeah, probably, because you don't know what you're going to see out on the job. But it's also a good idea to kind of familiarize yourself with the one you're going to use the most often if you're going to take it to the next step and learn to do programming. I would say if you're pretty good at DMX programming, you should be able to pick up other brands of software fairly quickly, because the process is generally the same. You got to patch fixtures, you got to map the fixtures, you got to arrange them in a way that they make sense based on DMX addresses, apply effects. So a lot of kind of the steps are the same, but everybody's software is unique and different. We are not going to go through much more of how that works in this presentation, because that's very complicated, and we would tailor that training to the Prism or American Lighting specific control system. If anybody is interested in that, certainly drop us a line and we can come up with a new training session that will specifically focus on our software platform and how it works. We're happy to do that. Most manufacturers, though, will not go out and support a software or a controller that they don't make. For example, Prism Lighting goes out and we do startups on site of lighting projects with our controls. If you tell us that you have brand B control and we don't know what that is, we can't go out there and do the programming on that. And that's pretty universal for most places, is if they don't sell it, they don't want to support it. So just be aware of what you're getting into when you're specifying a control system. Make sure that you or somebody that you can work with can program it and write the shows that the end user ultimately wants. Big questions that we get asked a lot of times: can I control my installation remotely, right? Everybody kind of controls and lives their life off of their cell phone or their tablet, and they want to do their lighting installations as well from that. Yes, you can, and there's a few ways we can do that. One of them is what we call local control, where you have a wireless access point, basically a Wi-Fi router, but it's not connected to the internet. And it gives you control over your system, generally through an app on your phone or a tablet, while you are local to that specific project. So let's say you're at a building and you want to be able to control the lights from just inside that building. As long as you're within range of your wireless access point with your app, you can do that. The controller has to obviously be set up to be able to do that, and we have controllers, and there are controllers that can do that, where you have just what we call, again, local control. If I go across the street, I might be out of the range of that local access point there, and I can't control it. Once I come back into the lobby of the building, I'm within range. My phone or my app picks up that router signal, and I can again control my lighting while I'm on site. not connected to the internet, local only. Yes, you can control your fixtures also remotely through the internet. You have to have an Ethernet-based DMX control system that would connect to a router that's connected to the internet. If it's not an Ethernet-based DMX fixture, you need to have a converter possibly to convert the Ethernet signal to a DMX signal out to your fixtures. But yes, you can control these type of applications generally through like an IP address. So you do an IP address on your phone, and you can do things like triggering shows. There's some limitations to what you can do with this. Generally, you're going to be triggering a show or changing scenes, things like that. You're not typically dialing in and updating calendar events with this type of thing. You're not generally going in and updating the shows, creating new shows. You don't really have that level of control. Some applications you do, but for the most part, you don't have the ability to dial in through your IP address with these and start creating new shows. But you can control it remotely as long as you have an internet access wherever you are and your system is connected to the internet at the building. You can control them and change scenes. A lot of times, you know, we live in unfortunate times where there might be a, you know, God forbid, a terrorist attack or something like that, and on the fly you're sitting on your couch and you want to run your red, white, and blue 4th of July show to show solidarity or something like that, or you know, like right now, a lot of places are changing their buildings to support our first responders and essential workers, right? And to be able to just go, you know what, I want to do that from home. Here's my blue show. I just sit on my couch, hit the button, and it'll change the show remotely. Is appealing to a lot of people. The other way to do it is through a cloud access control system. And a cloud access control system gives you a lot more flexibility, not only to trigger shows remotely, but also to upload and create new shows and new calendar events, because all of your DMX shows live out on the cloud. They don't sit on the DMX controller themselves, they sit on the cloud. So that allows you to do a lot of things. Sit at home, change your shows, change your schedules. That's fine based on stuff that's already stored on the controller. Or you can go on your laptop or your PC, and through the cloud, you can create an entirely new show. So if somebody says, hey, you know, you own a building and your best friend says, hey, my daughter's getting married this week. Her wedding colors are pink and blue. Can you change your building to pink and blue for me? You might not have a pink and blue show, but with this system, you can sit there and say, yeah, give me 10 minutes. Log in through the cloud, change the show, create a new show, upload it, set a calendar event for it to play, and pink and blue is on its way. The other nice thing about this is you can control multiple installations from your one PC. So if you are a theme park owner, or you're a movie chain theater owner, or a bowling alley chain theater owner, and you want to control all of your color changing lighting from one home office, you can do that as well. So you see in the example, you have New York, Los Angeles, and Dallas. You can control each one of those from one central location. You can also do things like group all of those and hit one button and it'll play the Christmas show on all of your locations at the same time. So very powerful tool. They're generally subscription-based, things like this, because you're paying for access to the cloud. So be aware of that. You know, you might get hit with a yearly fee. So if you're selling a project like this, the owner needs to know that there is a subscription fee every year that you will get dinged by. So make them aware of that. Sometimes it's easier to front load 5 years. You know, if you're dealing with a city or a municipality, sometimes it's hard to go back to the well for budgets every year. But if you front load 5 years, then they can usually find the money for that once, and and then the building manager or whoever it might be doesn't necessarily have to go every year back to the city council or whoever and ask for more money to keep the subscription going. Because once the subscription ends, your lights don't work anymore, and then you'd have to buy a hardwired DMX system or something else. So just be aware that they are, generally speaking, subscription-based control systems. There are also wireless DMX options. Generally speaking, the controller itself is not transmitting wireless DMX, but it's sending a DMX hard signal to a wireless transmitter, and then that transmitter will send out to a receiver. We see this a lot on retrofit applications where we can't always access new data signal wire. You might have existing power because it's an old historic building like the picture shows, and there may be power located there, but because it's historic, it limits what the contractor can do as far as cutting holes, drilling holes, tearing out plaster potentially inside, or who knows what's going on. So you may not always be able to get a hard DMX connection. So there are wireless solutions out there. They are very expensive, and they do, in a lot of instances, require line of sight. So going around corners or from building to building, if there's a big tree in the way, potentially a truck parks there overnight or something like that, that could potentially block the signal. So you may get some interruption in your shows, things like that. We always suggest to exhaust every resource you possibly can to run a hard wire connection for DMX cable or Cat5 before you start exploring a wireless DMX system. Again, it's expensive, and the line of sight issue becomes a problem sometimes. But wait, the next thing coming down the pipe in DMX wireless will be a DMX mesh system, similar to what you see in like a Bluetooth mesh system, but a DMX mesh system. So it's wireless. You have a transmitter that goes to a receiver, and then every receiver lets that signal flow in any direction towards all the other receivers. So it creates more, like I said, of a mesh, like a web over your entire DMX installation. And as that rolls out, you'll see more applications where wireless makes a lot more sense, because you don't have that line of sight issue anymore. You're creating this mesh where the signal path goes in every possible direction. And that's really nice. So you'll eliminate the need to run hard wires on new construction possibly, and especially on retrofit applications where you might not be able to pull that signal wire. It's going to help a lot. Can you trigger your DMX shows with a third-party triggering device? Yes, you can. Typically, we see dry contact closure inputs that will trigger a DMX show on the controller, and those triggers could be anything. It could be a customized keypad. Let's say this is a children's museum and they want to make their own fun, colorful buttons, and as you push those buttons, it may change the effects of the lighting for the kids. You can do that. You can use motion sensors. There's lots of different types of motion sensors, whether it's passive infrared or sonic or ultrasonic. Even things like garage door, you have that beam, and if you cross that beam as the garage door is coming, it'll stop the garage from opening or closing. You can use things like that. The little thing on the bottom looks like a lollipop is a pressure sensor. So if you step on something and it might change a show, again, think of children's museums, children's hospitals, things like that, where you want a lot of dynamic content and interactive with the end user or the person that's looking at the installation. So it could be a pressure sensor, could be a wind sensor. Anything really that sends a dry contact signal can work. You can use an easy button. If an easy button sends a dry contact signal, go ahead. Some of the controllers will take direct dry contact closure input. So for example, the controller on the top is our DIN rail mounted one, and it'll take dry contact closures directly to the controller itself. Other control systems, you may need an auxiliary device that takes that dry contact and then sends it to the controller. So just be aware of that. You can also trigger DMX shows with musical inputs. A lot of people ask that, can I sync my shows with music? Yes, you can. Not every DMX controller has the ability to do that. There are some out there that do. There's generally, an auxiliary device that you have to attach to that system to allow that to happen. I think it generally works off like a MIDI signal or something like that. But yes, you can have music to trigger shows as well. So the beat of the lights will match the beat of the music type of thing. That's going to be more in probably clubs and things like that. We don't see it a lot, but people generally will ask if it's available. But again, it's expensive. Not all control systems will handle it, but yes, you can do it. So DMX can do a lot, but it does have some limitations, right? We talked about using either a DMX cable or a Cat5. Anything else generally is not going to work. So don't try and run, like a 12.3 out there, because that's not going to work just because you have a bunch of it laying around from an old job. You do want a proper DMX cable, or you want a Cat5, Cat6, and make sure that that Cat5 or Cat6 is shielded. You do not want to run DMX or Cat5 cable in the same conduit as your power. Generally speaking, that's against code, and also could cause some interference and things like that. So Cat5 or DMX cable should be run in its own separate conduit. Even if it's shielded Cat5, run it in its own conduit, separate from power. There are limitations on how far a DMX signal can run, and it's 300 meters, basically 1,000 feet. That includes starting from your controller to the last fixture on your DMX run. So you don't just count the distance from the controller to the first fixture, you have to incorporate all the distance from the controller to the last fixture in a run. So be mindful of that. 1,000 feet is pretty far to go. There's also generally a limitation on the fixture as far as how many fixtures you might be able to run based on your amperage load. So you have to consider that as well. You may be able to run more fixtures on DMX than you can on your signal. So the number of devices you can run on a DMX run is 30. That's standard, across the board, 30 fixtures, 30 devices. So you may be able to do 30 devices, but you might be running, you know, a 300 watt fixture on a 20 amp circuit may only allow you to run 10 fixtures. So you have power to consider as far as the number of fixtures, and then your DMX consideration as well. So be mindful of that. There are 512 max addresses on a universe. So again, if we're talking about an RGB fixture, that's 170 fixtures. That's a lot of fixtures. But it also could be eaten up pretty quickly if you're doing pixel level control type stuff. So if you have a tape light, for example, that's controlled every 2 inches, that's going to eat up a lot more DMX addresses than a single run of standard color changing tape light. So be aware of how many addresses you're consuming, right? And then you have some limitations on the controller itself, right? Is it standalone controller or is it programmable? Is it something that you just take out of the box, put it on a single gang box in the wall, and it's got some pre-programmed functionality to it, scroll your finger around the wheel, pick a color type of thing, very easy to use? Or does somebody have to go out there with a laptop and configure the shows? Big difference in price and complexity when we're talking about that. Do I want local control or remote access? Some controllers are just, like I said, they're just designed to do hardwire connection to your fixtures without any sort of outside influence or access. And then your address capacity of your controller, right? Is my controller designed to handle 1 universe, but I have 10 universes of lights? That's going to be a problem. So you want to make sure that you have the capacity to handle the load of addresses that you're going to be controlling with the control system that you're looking at. Lots of control systems are expandable, so you can add to them. You can add universes. Other control systems, you get what you get. You buy a 2-universe DMX controller and you can't add to it, and that's what you're living with. If you have 2.5 universes, well, you're going to either have to share universe addresses on fixtures, or you're going to have some fixtures that aren't going to do anything. So be aware of that. And then your wire topology, right? We love DMX to be daisy chained. So from fixture to fixture, from device to device. We don't like things to be split. So don't come out of your DMX controller to a Wago and then run 3 runs out of the Wago. We don't generally like that. We like to see a DMX daisy chain run, home run back to the controller. Or if you need to split and go different directions, you can use a DMX splitter. There's a picture of a DMX splitter on your screen. DMX splitters are really nice because it gives you separate isolated DMX runs. So in the one in the picture there, you've got 8 outputs. So you go DMX in, and then you have 8 separate isolated DMX runs. Each one of those DMX isolated runs will go 1,000 feet and will carry 30 devices. So don't think that you're stuck with 30 devices and 1,000 feet. With that splitter now, I can go in 8 different directions, 30 devices times 8, and then 1,000 feet in any one of those directions. So we have ways of increasing the capacity and making a system work based on using splitters. There are lots of different connection types within the DMX world. Generally speaking, we see bare wire, but there's also what we call XLR. If you're not familiar with XLR, it looks kind of like a microphone jack when you're looking at, you know, audio stuff. It's a 3-pin or a 5-pin. Generally, it's a metal thing. Plug it into what looks like a microphone jack. That can be used for DMX. And then RJ45, which is what Ethernet cable uses. So, you know, the same thing that plugs into your router is RJ45. Some systems will take an RJ45 input or connection type. And then always, always, always terminate your DMX runs, right? So If you don't terminate your DMX runs, a DMX terminator is a resistor in a sense. If you don't terminate your runs, you can get some noise and some frequency things that could cause some feedback and some looping and really cause some havoc on your system. So when you're trying to run a show, your sequencing might get off, your timing might get off, you might get stuck in a loop, things like that. It basically quiets down the system and allows the communication to flow better. So always terminate your DMX runs. Most manufacturers sell DMX terminators. Sometimes the fixture might have a switch in it where you flip it saying, hey, I'm the last fixture, and that terminates it. Sometimes you might have power data supplies, depending on the manufacturer. Inside that power data supply, there might be a little dip switch that says, hey, I'm the last in the line, I'm terminating my DMX. Or you might just have to physically add a DMX terminator to the end of the run of a fixture. But again, most companies will sell that as a part accessory. It's not something that you have to go out to Radio Shack and find a resistor and solder in. Don't worry about that. You could, but generally speaking, they're out there and available as a part that you can buy. And you know, on the Prism side of thing, we will generally include a DMX terminator or however many terminators based on however many runs we have. You know, if we're using a DMX splitter and we have 5 runs, we're generally going to include 5 DMX terminators. So most manufacturers should be including those if it's not part of the system or the fixture itself via a switch on the fixture. Within Prism lighting or American lighting as well, we have a few different control options. We have some standalone options, very simple, easy to use, cost effective. Don't have to hire somebody to come out there and do the programming. Generally speaking, you read the instructions, you should be able to figure it out. There's a couple of zones you can set, a couple of scenes you can set, but generally speaking, very simple, easy to use, standalone, easy programming. Then we also offer our DLC and our DIN. They're essentially the same thing with a couple of different features. They're both 2 DMX universes. They allow zone control, so you could have front of house, back of house, bar, and facade lighting as different zones, and they can all be controlled separately within that controller. There are 2 universes, so again, you have 2 universes of 512, so a total of 1,024 DMX address capability. The one on the left has some presets buttons, so you could have calendar events going where you run a show every day at sunset to sunrise, but on special events like sports teams or maybe a holiday or something like that, you want to go up and push a button and say, today I want to play my my local high school colors because they're playing football tonight. The next one I might want to trigger is Sunday. I might go up and push a button for my local NFL team or my local MLB team, whatever it might be. You can go up and manually override and have some buttons that you can do. You've got 8 preset buttons, and then you've got 10 pages. So you have a maximum of 80 potential preset buttons. It's wall mount. It's got 5 inputs for dry contact inputs. So we talked about some remote triggering devices. You can do that right there on that controller. You've got 5 inputs, so you could have 5 sensors or 5 buttons remotely that will trigger shows on this. And again, you've got calendar events, so you can have shows that are scheduled for day of the week, day of the month, specific days. You know, we know 4th of July is the 4th of July every year. I can program so that I have a 4th of July show that runs on the 4th of July. Where I might want to use my override buttons, though, is I don't know every time my local sports team is playing. They might play a Thursday night game, they might play a Monday night game, they might play a Sunday game. So the ability to walk up and push that sports team button with an override button is very nice and important. The other one is the DIN. It does basically everything that the other one does. It just doesn't have any of the preset button control ability and multiple pages and dimming effects that you have on the screen. Still, it's 2 DMX addresses. It can be configured to receive or transmit. You can actually use the DLC as the front end of your installation, so you have keypads. But if you're doing a 4 DMX universe project, this could be the front end with 2 DMX universes, and then you add a DIN in the background that has your additional 2 DMX universes. It'll take the dry contact input. It'll also receive RS-232 from a third party if you needed to do that. It's wall mount. I'm sorry, not wall mount. It's DIN rail mount only, so I need to correct that slide. And this one has 15 dry contact inputs. So you can really have a lot of third-party input to that device as well. And it also has the same calendar event function as well. You can connect up to 32 of these devices to get a total of 64 DMX universes on this system. So it's really kind of nice and expandable. We stock it, it's good to go. This does require, though, somebody who can hook up with a laptop and do the programming. We offer that service. If you're a rep that wants to take ownership of that, we encourage that. If you're a contractor that wants to take ownership of that, that's fine. If we have to go out there and do it, we have to get on an airplane, generally speaking, unless it's somewhere in our backyard. There's a fee and a cost associated with us getting on an airplane, hotel, meals, rental car, whatever it might be. So it can add up. If we go out there and we program a job, everybody says they love it, they sign off, we fly home. A week later, the building owner says, you know what, I like this show, but the fades are too fast. Can we slow those fades down? It's a little bit, you know, seizure causing or something like that. Well, that means that somebody's got to get back on an airplane. But if you're local, or you hire somebody local, you have somebody on staff that wants to take ownership of that, you know, they say, yeah, I'm busy today, but I'll be there tomorrow. It's an hour, billable hour versus a whole other trip for somebody on an airplane. So we encourage local programming people wherever possible. But that being said, don't assume because you program your Nest thermostat in your house that you can program a DMX control system. It's quite different, but if you are familiar with how it works, the software is generally available for most manufacturers, including us, to be downloaded, and you can play with it, figure it out, learn it, test it, and you know, again, take ownership of that installation yourself. Questions that you should ask before you start looking at quoting or designing a color changing job. Are plans available? If no plans are available, is there pictures? Is there an address? We use Google Earth and Google Maps for pretty much every retrofit job we do, because there's generally no plans available, but we can gather a ton of information based on just going to Google, finding the maps, or Google Earth. But if plans are available, very important, especially if you're replacing existing lights. New construction, obviously there's hopefully plans, and you can get a lot off of that. But you know, on a retrofit job, plans are very helpful. If not, any pictures, you know, go do a job walk for sure. Get out there, measure distances, find out where the controller is going to be mounted, distance between fixtures, setback of fixtures from the wall, all that kind of stuff we want to know. How does the owner or the end user want to control the lights? We talked about, you know, local access control, internet control, cloud-based control. Do they want that sort of thing? That's a very important question to ask, because that's going to steer you towards the right control system. Where's the controller going to be located? There are very, very, very few instances where a controller will live outdoors. I've done a few jobs where there's been bridges that are remote and there's nowhere to mount anything indoors, and they'll put the controller in the NEMA enclosure. For the most part, we want it indoors. You know, good ideas on buildings would be either a management office, sometimes a security desk has a lot of ability to control lights, whether it's a keypad or something at the security desk in a building. Building engineers really like to monitor and control that stuff, because they're monitoring their fire alarm system, they're monitoring their HVAC system, they're monitoring the standard lighting control system in a building. So they generally might want to have access to that controller in their office or where their control systems are located. So just figure out where it's going to be, and that will also help determine, you know, some of your run length distances. If your controller needs to live 3,000 feet away from where the first light is, that could be an issue, and we might need a lot of splitters or think of something else. So very important to know where that controller is going to live. If we've got an existing project, can we pull new DMX signal wire? We have power potentially. Power is generally not the problem. It's getting signal wire to that fixture. I got sent a project just this morning, and they sent me a picture, and it was a floodlight that they want to retrofit to color changing, but I could tell, and I'm waiting for some more information, but I could tell that it's just on a concrete pedestal out in the middle of a grass field, probably throwing light at the facade of a building, right? Well, I've got power there for sure, but if I've got a fixture out 20 feet into the, you know, the landscaping of that site, might be really hard for me to get signal wire from the building. That might require somebody to do some trenching or who knows what. So can we pull signal wire? If we absolutely can't pull signal wire, that's when we start looking at some of the wireless solutions that are available. But again, that's going to be expensive. Am I controlling RGB, RGBW, RGBA? How many points of light am I controlling, right? Because that's going to determine the size of the control. What type of shows is the owner interested in? Are they interested in a different show every night? Are they interested in maybe one show that runs all the time? What kind of shows? Because then that's going to determine, you know, how much time potentially we have to factor in to do the programming. If they want 50 shows, that's a lot different than if they want 5 shows, right? So that's going to determine how much time you need to budget to do the programming. Do we need to control multiple zones of lighting? That will also help steer you towards a specific control system. Some control systems do not allow zone control, others do. If you have multiple zones and you want different things to be doing different things at different times in different areas, we need to know that. Do we require third-party triggering devices? We talked about that. If you do, then you want to have some way of getting that dry contact closure, typically input, to trigger shows. And do we need to integrate with any other control systems? Do we need to integrate with a Lutron system? A lot of times color changing jobs have to work with Lutron. Lutron doesn't have very good offerings necessarily in DMX control systems, so we might have to integrate with Lutron. If Lutron can send me a dry contact closure signal from one of their keypad stations, I can trigger shows. Do I have to integrate with an existing DMX control system? If you're doing a theater project, or maybe you're doing a school auditorium, maybe you're doing a church. A lot of churches already have DMX. Do we need to integrate with their system? We need to know that stuff so that we can either include controls or not include controls, or include a control system that can integrate with that. So lots of different questions that you want to ask with these color changing applications in DMX. That's what I got. We can open it up for some questions. I see a few already came through. Yes, we can. We recorded this as well, so my voice will be available. But if somebody does want the presentation, I'm sure we can do that. But it has been recorded, and I think we send a link out for that or something. What is the difference between 5-wire and 3-wire DMX? I'm not familiar with a 5-wire DMX cable. Give me 1 second. I'm going to see if I can unmute somebody who can help answer some of these questions. I'm going to unmute Patrick, who is the Prism and American Lighting controls expert, and he may be able to answer some of that. Are you on, Patrick?
Can you hear me?
Yeah, a little bit, yeah.
So 5 was initially designed for future, and those 4th and 5th pins were never utilized. So DMX never exceeds 3 wires. So that's the answer to that question. Verilight basically at the beginning wanted to have the ability to have talkback features on pins 4 and 5. That was then replaced by the RDM protocol, which uses the existing 3 wires.
Got it. Is a universe limited to the equipment? Meaning, do I need more equipment for more universes? Generally speaking, yes, you do. In a standalone DMX control system, yes, you will potentially have to add hardware. But it also depends on the manufacturer. A company like Pharos, for example, makes a single rack-mounted DMX controller that potentially has upwards of 100 universes on one unit. With a system like ours, though, we have the front end DLC controller that's 2 universes, and you can add the DINs in the background to expand on that. So it really depends on the control manufacturer. It might be one device, like ETC, Pharos, they may have one device, and then you're basically paying for unlocking of universes. So it's a 10 universe controller might look very similar to a 100 universe controller in size and everything, but they just will unlock via keys additional universes. So it's either way. It depends on the control manufacturer. They may have one device that'll handle up to 100 universes, or you may have to add supplemental things in the background like our system. Can you clarify zones? If each fixture or section of fixture is individually addressable, when would you need different zones? A zone is more front of house, back of house, bar, and facade. So think of a hotel. A hotel might have a ballroom that has some color changing coves. It might have some facade lighting on the exterior, and it might have a bar in the lobby that has some color changing applications. Each one of those would be a zone, and you may not want all of the lights in all of those places to do the same thing at the same time. So if you're having a wedding in the ballroom, you might want to run a different show than what the bar is running and what the facade is lighting. So that would be zone control.
The big takeaway is concurrent operation. So you can have multiple presets running in multiple places simultaneously. That's where the zone feature comes in.
What is the gauge and conductor count for DMX cable, and what parts of the cable need to be shielded? Patrick?
It's typically 24 gauge. It's a twisted pair with a ground cable, typically unsheathed. In Cat 5, you use the orange, white, and orange pair, and then use the brown, white pair to accomplish DMX. The shielded portion is around the entirety of the cable, so it would encompass all of the pairs. And like the thing has said multiple times, the type of cable really, really matters. And that comes down to the twist and the ohm rating for the wire. That's why a lot of times when the wrong wire is used, that's where the issues come in, is because copper is not equal in this situation. It has a lot to do with the construction of how the cable is actually created, not necessarily just the gauge of the wires.
Yeah, and that's different from potentially your cable that's going to send a dry contact from your Lutron keypad, right? That's the Lutron keypad is not necessarily using a DMX cable. It's using some other low voltage cable to get the dry contact signal to the controller or to the auxiliary part to trigger a show. So don't confuse the two of those, right? Your keypad to the controller is different than the controller out to your fixtures, and that's a DMX cable. And what Patrick said with using Cat 5, you know, if you take apart, you've got green, green, white, orange, orange, white, blue, blue, white. You've got lots of different twisted pairs in there. You really can use any of them. It doesn't matter. Typically with DMX, you use orange, orange, white. You have what we call data positive, data negative, and ground. You can use any of them. Traditionally, though, it's orange, orange, white for data positive, data negative, and then brown for your ground. Just make sure that you're consistent throughout your entire operation. So don't go from orange at one location and then start doing brown or blue. You want to make sure it's consistent throughout the whole installation, that you're using the same two twisted pairs. So would you need any additional equipment? I'm not sure, Katie, what you're asking. I can unmute you if you'd like, if I can find you. All right, Katie.
Hey.
I muted you if you want to ask.
I had asked it right after you started responding about the zones. So basically different program areas or sections you want separated. Does that mean you need additional equipment, or how do you run multiple, I guess, shows to do different things in different areas? Do you need additional, I guess, components to make that happen?
With our controller, you do not, and I'll let Patrick answer more how that's programmed and done, but our controller has 5-zone capability. So with one controller, you can control 5 different areas, and I'll allow Patrick to kind of talk about how that's done more than you know, just saying, yes, you can do 5 zones.
Yeah, so on the front of that black controller that has the 8 buttons, there's those menu features, and what you do is you just go to the menu feature, select the zone that you want in question, and then those 8 buttons at the top then corresponds to that zone. So like he was using for like the ballroom example, is maybe you have a show going on in the ballroom and then you have another ballroom. So you have a couple of different ballrooms. You could have zone A corresponding to ballroom A and zone B corresponding to ballroom B. So you could be having, you know, just a basic white light static for, you know, a presentation going on in ballroom B, but maybe ballroom A is having a party, so they want to have the lights doing a little bit more dynamic. You can have one DMX controller controlling that for both different spaces simultaneously, and then zones C, D, and E, for example, could be the lobby or the bar or the common areas that you may want to have just doing some static basic looks. Whereas if you're using a different controller, all lights in the entire system correspond to a single preset. So you wouldn't be able to maintain a dynamic preset while maintaining a static preset in an additional location without that capability.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, you could use a non-zone control DMX controller and have different shows going on in different locations, but it requires, you know, a lot more programming. But if you're looking at the picture of our controller here, there's a little screen here and you've got a settings button and up and down arrows. So you get to the settings button and you get to one that says Z, and you'll have Z 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then you can trigger shows based on whatever zone, or through the programming, you can have that done automatically.
Yeah, so for example, like you know, maybe the outside goes to blue and then the inside goes to, you know, a nice warm white color, and then at 10 o'clock the inside turns off but the outside still stays on. So that allows that to happen because of those zones. Whereas if you had a controller that didn't have that zone capability, if you made one zone turn off, the other zone would also turn off at the same time.
Yeah, and there are controllers out there as well, not necessarily ours, but there are controllers out there that have things like if-then logic as well. So based on different events and things like that, it'll trigger shows. So there's some complicated control systems that'll take logic into account as well. So, you know, if it's 5 o'clock, then do this, or if it's cloudy based on emotions, you know, whatever it is, then do this. There's lots of different things that can trigger shows and zones and things like that. But specifically with ours, you know, we have the 5-zone control, which is really nice. In a standalone 2-universe DMX controller, to have 5-zone control is pretty good. Any other questions out there? Did we leave you less confused or more confused?
Am I still unmuted?
You are unmuted, yes.
Okay, can I just ask one more question? I don't know if you got to it. Can you just explain universes and what that means? Is a universe tied again to a piece of equipment, or is it kind of arbitrary? Like a universe is just 512
Well, yes, a DMX
addresses.
universe is universally, a DMX universe is 512 addresses, right? So if we're talking again about a 3-channel fixture, an RGB fixture, let me go back some slides. Right, so if we're talking about an RGB fixture, right, that can handle up to 170 fixtures, because 170 times 3, it's like, I don't know, it's 512 basically. So a universe allows you to handle 512 channels or addresses, right? Some controllers are a universe out of the box. Our controllers are 2 universes out of the box. Some controllers are half a universe out of the box. Generally speaking, the more universes or addresses the more addresses you're controlling, generally the more expensive your control system is going to be. So if you only need to control 120, let's say you have 5 light fixtures, you might not want a 2-universe control system where a half a universe control system might work. So you might have something that's 128 channels or 256 channels. So depending on the control system, out of the box, it will handle a certain number of universes, and each one of those universes is 512 channels or addresses.
So universe is just a term to describe a quantity of
Yes.
like addresses.
Correct.
It's not,
yeah. And it's
okay.
always 512. It's always 512 addresses equals 1 DMX universe.
And it's just an easy way for you to understand how big or complex the system is. If you need 100 universes, it's very much more intensive than 1.
Correct. Yes. If you need 100 universes, that is a massive. That's like when you see those buildings in China where the entire building is lit and they're doing graphics and text and images scrolling through there. That's 100 universes, right? When you're looking, you know, this, when I showed this picture right here, this bar, that bar is, it's probably only using, the entire bar is probably only using maybe 12 to 15 DMX addresses.
Yeah, and that's like all the shelves are the same. So like if you wanted each of those shelves to be able to be a different color at the same time, each of those shelves would then be 3 DMX addresses.
Right. So if you can see my cursor, all of these shelves, if they're controlled to do the same thing at the same time, and that's RGB tape, all of those shelves are consuming only 3 DMX addresses. However, if this shelf needs to be one color while this shelf is a different color, if each one of those shelves needs to be a different color, then I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, however, 20 shelves times 3 addresses. So now I'm at 60 addresses. This whole under cabinet bar is probably controlled as 1 unit. So that whole under bar is doing 3 DMX addresses. So you can get some pretty complicated looking stuff without using a whole lot of addresses and use a small control system, right? You wouldn't need 100 DMX universe controller to control this bar. You could do it probably with 128 address controller or half a universe or a single universe.
And to on that, so maybe you do have a bar owner that says, I want this bar to be super awesome. There's things called pixel tape. So where each of those diodes, every 3 diodes could be its own color, you could take that bar and turn it into multiple universes, and then you could pixel map and have that bar doing, chasing patterns across the entire wall. So it really depends on when you're talking to your customer, what do you want, and understanding what they want really helps us be able to help you guys sell the product and the necessary controller to make sure that you're giving this customer their expectation. And if you come in and you let them know, hey, by the way, we have these products that we can do this stuff, you may be able to upsell that product and upsell that customer to be able to get something a little bit more complicated in there, thus getting everyone a little bit more money.
Yeah, so that bar that's purple right there, it could be using 3 DMX addresses. Maybe if it's RGBW, it's 4 DMX addresses. If we change that to pixel level control, where I can control every 2 inches of that tape, then I probably am close to, if not more than a DMX universe on that bar, going the full 90 degrees of that bar. So you can see how stuff can really add up depending on what you're controlling and the amount of points of light that you're controlling. But if anybody has 100,000 or a 100 universe project, please come to us.
Yes. So I can answer your question, Greg. So to answer for Savant, Control 4, and Crestron, through IP, no, but the RS-232 port, specifically on Control 4, you go to an RS-232 to RS-45 DMX interface, and what that does is it gives you one DMX universe of control. So if you're trying to communicate with us to do complex shows, you can take the RS-232 control directly off the back Savant Control Crestron accordingly, and you can send us clear text commands through RS-232 to the DIN rail controller, and what the control side, the front end of Savant Control 4 can then just launch presets from the user interfaces and touchscreens and buttons as part of their control, and then we would just be a third party to them receiving those signals. That's where the RS-232 is really, really useful, because it allows you to basically give clear text commands. So you can say zone 1 dim up, zone 1 dim down, and you can do really complex stuff. If you're looking strictly to use those systems to manipulate and send DMX through the integrated DMX compatibility and capabilities of those systems, you'll have to use an RS-232 to DMX interface. And then in that situation, Prism would not apply controls, but we would strictly apply DMX devices and decoders. Does that answer your question? I don't know if you want to unmute him, John, if he has any further questions.
Oh, I didn't even see that he asked the question.
He did it in the webinar chat.
Oh. Who was it?
Greg Jenkins.
All right, he is unmuted. Chris, I'm not sure if there's a reason that it's 512 maximum. Is there a reason, Patrick, or is it just standard?
It comes down to the 8-bit limitation of analog control. So that's where the limitation of 512 comes from. The signal was made in the 1990s. And that was when they were basically just coming out of the analog to digital level control, and that was just a limitation of the protocol. When it first came out, a lot of places like, I don't imagine how you could ever need more than one universe. And now we're looking at Olympics and stuff of that size that are in the thousands of universes. So it's a platform that's definitely grown over time, and that's where the network protocol has come in. If you're ever going into the extremely large scale systems, you're going to be transitioning from a hardline DMX into a network backbone infrastructure, which then uses devices to convert the Ethernet protocol into DMX at the actual device level. So when you get into the large complex systems, it just becomes that much more complicated. But on your small scale systems, like what we're dealing with with the DIN rail controller, we can run 12, 14, 16 universes in a hardline environment with relative ease. You can run that same system over an Ethernet protocol, but it just really comes down to cost and complexity and the expectation of what the end user's expectations are.
Yep. Robert, is there a limitation to what you might use Cat5, 6 versus DMX cable? I think it's really just comes down to cost more than anything. The DMX cable, could be at $1 to $3 a foot versus Cat5, which is pennies per foot. We always suggest Cat5. We don't really suggest, we sell DMX cable. We don't sell a whole lot of it. We use a lot of it in-house more for making up connectors and jumpers or whatever we might need, or leader cables and stuff. But for the most part, we always suggest Cat5, Cat6. Most contractors are more familiar with it. It's easier for them to get. They might have it on their shelf. Really isn't Patrick, unless you have a reason why to use DMX cable, I don't think there really is much of a reason.
The shielded is probably the big part about that as well. Cat 5 and Cat 5 shielded are not created equally. The reason that shielded is because the data signal itself is very easily manipulated by additional sources, specifically power and inductive voltage and proximity. So whenever you see a system that's flashing or doing erratic behavior, you almost guarantee that that comes down to interference on the line. So that shielded portion of the Cat 5, just like you said, it's availability. You can get one-day shipment on Amazon to your door of shielded Cat 5 for pennies on the dollar compared to what DMX cable. I mean, plenum rated DMX built-in cable retails at $4.50 a foot. So, it just really comes down to trying to help your contractor and, make the project come in at a cost. And a lot of times that DMX cable is sold in 1,000-foot spools. If you have a project that only needs 100 feet of DMX cable, now you're sitting on 900 feet of DMX cable that you don't know necessarily when that contractor is going to use again.
Yeah, and they can use Cat 5 multiple times if they have extra. They can crimp on their own RJ45s and use it again, where DMX cable they may not ever use again. And people say, well, can I use doorbell signal wire? Can I use any? No. Generally, we tell them no. Cat 5, Cat 6, shielded, or DMX cable. Any other questions? No. Well, it looked like we had well over 100 people, so that was good. We're happy to do this again. If you have specific customers or anybody that you would like to present this to, we're happy to do it again. A lot of people are sitting at home right now, captive audience, so just let us know. We don't want to just make this a one-time thing. If you have other customers or other people that might be interested in seeing this, certainly let us know. But we do appreciate everybody jumping on. Hopefully you took something away from it. We'll make the recording available. And then any questions, reach out to either your Prism people or your American Lighting people for any specific questions that you might have. And other than that, if there's any other questions, see, there's like a hand raise thing. I'm not sure what that is. But yeah, I think we're good. Any other questions? If not, thank you. Appreciate your time, and have a good day.